Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the York Festival of Ideas. I'm Mary Garrison from the History Department here at the university, and I'll be chairing the event today. It is a very great pleasure to have you here. It is a great pleasure to introduce Michelle Brown. Many people here attended the first part of Michelle's series on Illumino, her talk last year, and so you'll know what an inspiring speaker she is, and you will know why we are so delighted to have her back. Michelle is Professor Emerita of Medieval Manuscripts at the University of London and a visiting professor at University College London. She is also a Fellow of the Society of Antiquaries, Patron of the Society of Bookbinders, and an Honorary Lay Canon of Truro Cathedral. She was formerly Curator of Illuminated Manuscripts at the British Library and a Lay Canon and Chapter Member of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. She's published, lectured, and broadcast widely on early medieval cultural history. I think one of my favorite things about her work is the way she can make the most granular, tiny details of manuscripts come to life and bring us into the world, the imagination, the religious experience of the people who made and used them. As well as Illumino, about which she's speaking today, Michelle's books include Bede and the Theory of Everything, Art of the Islands, and a book on the Lindisfarne Gospels. Today we are delighted to have Michelle here to educate, entertain, and inspire us about the history of medieval Britain through the biographies of the medieval manuscripts.
Well, thank you very much, Mary, Sarah, and all the team that are helping us to enjoy the festival. And most of all, thank you to all of you for coming. It feels like several centuries since I was last here, but it was only last year that many of us convened. Could you just pop your hands up if you came to part one? Would you put your hand up if you can remember any of it? Good out. Well, as my dad used to say to his old Irish neighbour, if you forget the same things that I forget, we'll both be all right. So, let's go. What are we doing here? Right, Illumino Part Two. We're going to pick it up in the end of the 12th century, and we're going to go up to jolly old Henry VIII. So we better get our skates on. And the remit of the way in which I've sort of written the book is basically to look at particular books that have got particularly strong human interest and project management information about the people who made and who used them, and to use that insight into those lives through the portal of the books that they made and owned, to actually see what was going on in the particular century that they lived in, and how that work marks quite a personal response to what's going on. Sound like fun? Okay, right, let's do it. So, we're going to start in the late 12th century with Giraldus Cambrensis, Gerald of Wales, and one particular work of his, the Topography of Ireland, the Topographia Hibernica. And you'll see, I won't give you the telephone numbers of the manuscripts. They're up on the screen or in the book, or you can just Google them by those names and you'll find them. Okay? So we use their nicknames. So Gerald was born in around 1146 and died in 1223. So he's in a particularly good bridging position between the Romanesque period and the early Gothic. Now, he composed the Topography of Ireland between 1186 and 1188. And that was because he was given a particular commission in 1183, which was to take young Prince John out of the way and take him on a tour of Ireland and preach crusade. And so these are his impressions, or allegedly his impressions, of the places that they visited. He followed that up with the Expugnatio Hibernica, the conquest of Ireland, so we can see already where the drift is going, in 1189. He also wrote a typography and an itinerary of his native Wales as well. And we've got 24 surviving manuscripts of the Irish typography and 5 14th century volumes with either abbreviated excerpts as well as the full manuscript copies. And we've got 2 that are first generation from around about 1200, 1210, which are made under his direct supervision, okay? And those are fully illuminated. One's in the British Library, which is the one that most of my images are from today, and the other is in the National Library of Ireland, quite fittingly. And there are subsequent illustrated copies in the Bodleian and Cambridge University Library. So I think you'll get the point straight away that this was quite a well-disseminated, a published work. That's a very high sample of survival for the period. Oh, ignore that. We'll read it if you get bored of what I'm saying. But basically, Gerald is a bit of a George Bernard Shaw. He was the grandson of one of the most dashing of the Norman knights who'd carved out a patrimony in Wales, in West Wales, where he married a woman called Nestor, who was known as the Helen of Wales because of her immense beauty. And they had a wonderful castle at Manorbier, which is not too far from Larne, where Dylan Thomas did his writing, etc. It's that part of the world. But he had ambitions. He had ambitions in Wales, and he'd had ambitions in the Angevin court. And rather like George Bernard Shaw, when he was in London or at the Angevin court, he was that bloody Celt. And when he was in Wales or Ireland, he was that feckin' Englishman. Okay? So he's very much got a foot in both camps. And his attempts to actually try and bridge that gulf, there are some really interesting approaches there. But he has very definite agendas, as we'll see. He's also spent time studying in the cathedral schools of Paris during the late 12th century. He would have known people like Peter Lombard, possibly Hugh Saint-Victor, and he had lots of other friends there, Stephen Langton, Walter Mapp, and so there were a little bit of an expat Irish academic community raising hell on the left bank and buying books, second-hand books on the Parvisus in front of Notre Dame de Paris. And so he's part of the nascent movement of scholasticism, the new learning, that tried to bridge the gap between innovatio and traditio, received wisdom and experimental learning, and also the new learning which is coming through from the East as a result of the Crusades and long-distance pilgrimages, the reintroduction of the works of Aristotle, for example, which had been retained in areas under Islamic rule from the 7th century onwards, but which weren't available to the West. And lots of new medical and scientific knowledge, etc. as well. So he's part of that orbit as well. This is Manorbier. If you get the Penguin edition of the topography of Ireland, and also the topography of Wales, you'll read his descriptions of his beloved homeland. And it's one of the most poetic pieces of writing of Hereth, the idea of the home, the beloved home. It's really quite moving. And I've just put this up as a cipher for Gerald. This is in the margins of the British Library manuscript, made at Lincoln around 1210. And Gerald is literally standing at the scribe and artist's shoulders, giving them instructions as they're working. And this is a passage in which he's talking about a book that he saw at Kildare, St. Bridget's great monastery in Ireland, where there was a book which was so wondrous and detailed that you would think it was the work not of man, but of angels. And of course, many generations of scholars have tried to prove that the Book of Kells was at Kildare. But given the it's like competition, shall we say, between the major parochial and monastic federations in Ireland, it's unlikely that the Federation of Columba would have lent Kells to Bridget. It's probably the case that the other great cult centres also had books of such stature. Okay? But we give that just as a cipher of Gerald. And he's a bit of a Howard Carter figure too. He wanted to, if you like, give the public lectures, the after-dinner speaking, and he wanted to have the PowerPoint presentations. So other than one set of marginal drawings in the copy of the History of Henry of Huntingdon about 10 years earlier, his books are the first to really start using the marginal space to actually illustrate, but also to pass comment on the text that accompanies them. And that is then, as we'll see as we go through the 13th century, combined with influences from legal manuscripts from Bologna, the great legal centre in Italy, etc., where you have grotesques in which the punishment fits the crime, which is the origins of all these little creatures that have different body parts, the part human part, and they all have moralistic interpretations. So he's at the beginning of this. And he wanted to actually influence people by publishing his works. And to the most important of those people, he wanted to give illustrated copies of those works. Kings, bishops, the nobles of church and state. And a number of them are what remain to us today. But also he hoped that it would reach the public. He was wanting to actually capture the imagination of the king, the court, the church, and as much as possible of the general populace to the wonders that lay on their doorstep in Wales and Ireland, as everybody was going wonders of the East, marvels of the East mad on the back of the Crusades. He wanted to say, but look what you're neglecting here. But of course there is a big agenda there because his relatives were amongst the foremost of the Norman mercenaries who had been employed in Ireland in the tribal politics there and who had begun carving out their own domains. And the role of the Angevin monarch, Henry II, and of the Pope in legitimising what they had taken is a big thing. And Gerald is lending his pen to the campaign, as we'll see. And so a number of the illustrations that we'll see in the margins of the topography of Ireland involve heroic Norman knights and the Irish thwacking and bashing each other in various ways as a way of showing that there were lots of different kingdoms and petty lordships who were fighting it out, and that the Normans were coming in to help bring stability. So there's an awful lot of propaganda implicit within this. He also accompanied his works with maps. They're not the most detailed, but they kind of do the job. So you've got the mainland Britain at the top there, and then the sort of black pudding is Ireland, and then you've got... Oh, no, hang on, what am I talking about? No, I'm not getting that right. Stick to plot and use your pointer. So this is the continent at the top. Ah, there it is. Yeah, so the continent's at the top. The black pudding is mainland Britain. And look at the, at least the Orkneys and the Shetlands and the Faroes are there. And that goes back to the Anglo-Saxon world map of the beginning of the 11th century under Canute, when we're part of an international Scandinavian trading empire, when Scandinavian and Irish and British navigation was feeding into the Mappa Mundi tradition. And then we've got Ireland here, and then Iceland. Okay, it's a sketch map, but it's at least serving to situate their uneducated readers. Now, at the end of his life, Gerald is mightily disappointed. He's thwarted in both his political and ecclesiastical ambitions. He largely scuppers himself on the rocks of nationalism because he wants to become Archbishop of Wales and to declare UDI, okay, for a church in Wales, and he's a little bit early for that. And so he retires eventually in high dudgeon to Lincoln, along with his Pall Water map, and leans on the scriptorium there to help him publish his works and get them out there. I managed to show that he is actually, they're not autographed manuscripts, but you've got to remember that during antiquity and the Middle Ages, it's rare for the author to literally hold the penna himself. It's more like voice-activated computing, okay? You've got an amanuensis, a secretary, etc. There are always the exceptions to that, though. There are the desktop publishers, such as Bede, okay, and Matthew Paris, Christine de Pizan. But by and large, you're passing it over to somebody who's taken notes on wax tablets or whatever. But Gerald is literally in the scriptorium and he's standing at their shoulder. And the way we know that, I think, is if we look here, the fish is the fish of Carlingford Loch in Ireland, which was notable for having a complete set of gold dentures. And he then points to a deer that has the same phenomenon in Dunham Woods, around Lincoln Cathedral. Okay, so he's equating it and making it part of English legend as well as Irish. And they're in the margins, and the element of the text that speaks about them is actually, as you can see, ruled as an additional element below the two main columns of the ruled text. So it's an editorial insertion. So as the scribe is actually copying the work, Gerald is standing there doing his second edition. Must have driven the scribe balmy. And then he's saying, and I'd also like images, not only for what we've just talked about, but for what I'm about to tell you as well. So it's a planning nightmare. It's very much on the hoof, but it gives you a real insight into Gerald's role. Now, if Gerald was an artist, we would know about it. He's not shy. But I think when he tells us about the way in which the Great Book of St. Bridget was made, he gives us a bit of an insight. He said an angel appeared to the scribe, guess who's the angel, and actually drew on wax tablets a sketch of what he should draw or paint. Okay, so I think he's basically doing drawings, and the artist or artist scribe is then having to translate that. And we can see some of these have actually got guidance notes as well. If you see the stork, which is posing as the early bird which catches the worm, you can see very, very faintly between the stork's legs is the word stork in very faint lead point. Now that could even be Giraldus's own hand, possibly, or a rather frustrated scribe who can't do it all quickly enough and is leaving a note to come back and tell himself what to put in subsequently. And he makes mistakes as well, does our Gerald. This is a passage that he's garbled from Pliny, which is about barnacles growing on rocks, except for he's muddled them up with barnacle geese, which grow on trees. And Matthew Paris then picks that one up, and it makes its way into the early copies of the bestiary until it's finally edited out. And this is him being very pro-Irish. This is St. Kevin of Glendalough, who is so in tune with the natural environment that one day when he is praying in the Oran's position and his hands are outside of his cell window, a blackbird comes and lays her egg, and he obligingly stays still until the eggs have hatched. A demonstration about, something that both the Celtic, inverted commas as a shorthand, and Anglo-Saxon and Germanic peoples bring to the Judeo-Christian Mediterranean nexus of nature poem and a devotional connection with creation care. And here he is basically saying, well, the trouble with the Normans is they ain't got no rhythm. They don't understand the sophistication of Irish music. Now, in one copy, the one in the National Museum of Ireland, they've got a dead ringer for this, one of the earliest harps to have survived in this corner of the world at this period, Brian Boru's harp, and it is of that particular form. Whereas you'll see here in the British Library manuscript, it's the continental form, so probably what the artist is familiar with. And so Gerald's possibly not drawn what he's actually seen, whereas the one in Dublin that he did supervise does. All sorts of wonderful detail. You've got this man who's disabled who goes through life on hand crutches. And then we've got the two men whom Gerald accounted in a little coracle. Now, the first thing to learn is never go to sea in a coracle. You will drown. It's a curragh that you want. Coracles are for rivers. Now, that's a giveaway to begin with. He would have been familiar with those in Wales. We don't really think that Gerald got any further than Wexford and Waterford, but he talks about the Aran Islands, etc. And he says that when they were off the Arans, they met these two men who were starving in their little coracle, and so they helped them. And they were the most wonderful, pure, noble savages who were naturally inclined to religion but had never heard of Christ. Now, given that the Arans were amongst the major seminaries, if you like, in the early Middle Ages, these are fictions that he's putting together. And then we have at the top there the bearded woman of Limerick, who, other than her, I quote, her hairy spine and her fulsome beard, was sufficiently feminine in her attributes. And next to her, we have the cowman of Wicklow, who was the progeny of a farmer and his favourite cow, and who became so beloved of the Norman garrison that he was mugged and killed on the way home one night by the locals. Now, what are all of these doing here, we wonder? I haven't got a picture. Yeah, at the bottom here, on the bottom left, bottom right, you will see a corresponding image, which is Joanna of Paris. Now, she was the Princess Diana equivalent of the day, and her royal in-laws got rid of her by claiming that she'd mated with a lion in the Royal Zoo and burning her at the stake. And what is all this about? And above that, we've got another Gerald episode. We've got a high king bathing in a broth made of a white mare's stew, which his followers are eating out of, which is basically a very garbled version of something from the Ulster cycle from much earlier, which is the king symbolically mates with the white mare to symbolise nature and kingship being unified and whole. But who knows what pub he got that story out of. But it all comes round when you actually see the letter that was issued in 1172 from Pope Alexander III to Henry II, in which the Angevin Norman conquest of Ireland was legitimised on grounds of bestiality and gross moral turpitude. So at one level, Gerald can say, the Irish are the most beautiful people on earth and the most naturally good when they're not thwacking each other, but they are also, left to their own devices, inclined to go astray. And what they most need is enlightened kingship, notably that of Henry II, whom, as we know, would only ever bathe in a broth of his own immediate family, if you've ever seen The Lion in Winter. Okay, so we see where it's going. But a complex work, and a new genre of topographical writing, very, very specific to place and to geo-ethnic politics of the time. And we know a lot of that from the images as much as we do from the text. Now, moving on a little later, early 13th century, we've got Matthew Paris. And at the bottom of this image, you've got Matthew. This is everything that you see by Matthew is in his own hand. He thinks it, he writes it, he draws it. Okay? And he uses tinted drawing rather than full painting and gilding because it's easier to do. Basically, it's like the equivalent in the 18th century if you're a young lady being taught to draw. You do watercolours. Oils are far more grown up, and they take a lot of time. And every time you put a new layer of colour on these pages, you've got to hang it up on a line to dry. If you've got gilding concern, then it makes the project much bigger. If you want that immediacy, you do tinted drawing. It's also very, very high status. From the Anglo-Saxon period, and in Ireland, there's a big tradition of artist scribes who are so proficient with the pen that graphic linearity is a great design strength. And then you might tint it with colour washes or coloured outline drawings. Okay? And this is his self-portrait, praying in front of the Virgin and Child from one of his most important works, the Chronica Majora, the big chronicle. and he's one of our major sources for the reign of Henry III. And we'll return to his work in just a moment, but I just want to talk briefly about, this is a period in which, in book history, you talk about the transition from a primarily ecclesiastical environment for book production, not exclusively. The courts of Alfred the Great, Charlemagne, the Ottonians, etc., would also be producing books, and individual scholars. But by and large, both men and women were producing books, generally in an ecclesiastical milieu. Then, if you believe the skeptics, everybody wakes up on January the 1st, 1201, and says, let's retool for a totally secular, lay, urban production milieu. Now, the monasteries, cathedrals, etc., don't stop producing, okay? There's still a tradition there. And secondly, it's not just lay people who are involved in urban book production, but you do move into a scenario of increasing lay specialisation in different crafts, rather than having a scriptorium with everybody taking their turns at the benches and having a scriptorium master or mistress. You're talking about people who live in streets. They might gather together. In Paris, the Rue des Écrivains is where some of the best paid of the scribes were, for example. And the unit of production normally is the family. It's a bit like the corner shop. And if you want more members of your profession, whatever you're in, you marry in more cousins, you get more of them in as apprentices, etc. If you want to expand even further and go into another area of production, you marry into another family and graft on. And quite soon in the 13th century, middlemen and women emerge to actually project manage. And they're known here normally as stationers, in Paris as libraires, and in Italy as cartolai. And they then gradually grow into publishing houses and then printing houses in the mid-15th century. Okay? It's interesting that only in the book-related skills were women allowed to trade independently in towns in the Middle Ages. And I think that's largely because they had always, going right back to the early Christian period, played an important role in book production and even in authorship. Okay. The rise of the university schools in Italy, Paris, then Oxford, Cambridge, play a big role in this, and then the universities that emerge around about the year 1200. You've got, how long have I been going on? Half an hour. Okay, we can do the rest of it, that's fine. Already in some of the great Romanesque Bibles of the mid-12th century, we've already got a bit of a crossover. Here you can see in the Dover Bible, made possibly in Canterbury for Dover Priory, you can see they parachuted in quite a wealthy lay artist who's painting one of the initials. He's got a lovely bejewelled velvet cap on. And this is really unusual. He's got his lay assistant with his little lay cap, and he's got a mortar and pestle, and he's grinding up pigments. This is really rare. Now, they've written the book in-house and done the minor decoration, but for the talent, they brought in a lay artist. And there's a reason for this. It's a pictorial colophon, although he doesn't name himself. And the reason it's there is he's mucked up the most important, costly pigment other than gold in the whole project, which is lapis lazuli from Badakhshan in the Himalayas. Now, that should give you that rich cobalt blue of the Virgin's robe. If you don't grind it in the right way, you have to keep grinding and suspending the particles in water and then taking the ones that flow off until you get the right density of pigment size. Otherwise, you get stone-washed denim jeans. And that's what's happened here. And so this is our wealthy artist saying, well, I'm very sorry about that, but you can see how wonderful my work is. And it's this Charlie's fault because he didn't follow the recipe and he mucked up your pigment. So you've already got some crossover. This is a sorter from Germany, now in Copenhagen, which shows you a monk, but he's going to a layman now to actually have his parchment, which is sheep or goat or vellum, purchased. It's being stretched on a frame and prepared. He then takes it back to the scriptorium, cuts it to size, pricks and rules the layout, and then gets on with the job. First a script, then any decoration to articulate and navigate. It's not just there as the cherry on the cake Decoration forms an important role in cognition and legibility. Hugh of Saint-Victor would say to you in Paris in the second half of the 12th century, you can't afford to own all your primary and secondary sources. They're going to be chained to church or chained libraries, colleges, etc. You use the paragraph structure, you use the mnemonics of colour, decoration, etc. to key the content of those openings in your mind. So it all has a function. But you notice again, it's a layman who, working somewhere else, is doing large full-page miniatures that will then be tipped in to the gatherings. So you've already, in the 12th century and early 13th, you've got a crossover of interaction. Also, within the urban milieu, many of those involved in book production were clerics in minor orders, like William de Braose, who made the first fully fledged Book of Hours in Oxford in the 1230s, 40s. He owned premises with his wife Selina. They were partners in every sense of the word. And like most of his ilk, he got tax breaks for being a cleric in minor orders. He was allowed to marry, and he didn't have to turn out at midnight to take his turn at the night watch. Also, many of those engaged in book production were friars. Until towards the end of the 13th century, there was a case called the Évangile Pardurable, in which a follower of the Franciscan friar Joachim of Fiore announced that why is the library of scripture, Biblios, the Bible, closed? Why are we not adding further inspirational and inspired works like Bonhoeffer? Now this, you can imagine, was heresy. And the university authorities and syndics in Paris and the royalty crashed down and turfed the friars out of publishing. Okay? So lots of things going on. And experiments in layout. These are wonderful wrap-round texts from Paris and then from Britain from the late 12th century, where the large script is used for your main text. This is Peter Lombard's commentary, his gloss on the Psalms. So the main text is the Psalms, and then you've got the smaller script is the wrap-round commentary. And then the pages are ruled so that you've got other spaces where if you want to add another commentary or you want to add your own annotations, you can do so. And that's what they looked at initially when they were designing tablet technology and layout, for how you can have interaction of multiple words, images operating within the same mechanism. Okay? And I love this one. This is a copy of Peter Lombard that Herbert of Bosham bought in Paris to give as a present to Thomas Becket. And he's had his own gloss annotations, and then somebody else, it may even have been Becket or somebody working for him, has added this wonderful figure, a graphic. You're never going to forget this. And the gloss that Herbert of Bosham has added said, and this, of course, was said by St. Augustine. And the image is saying, I'm St. Augustine, he's pointing his arrow, and he's saying, non ego, it wasn't me. So complex cognitive packages. And then somebody, we don't know who, no more than we know who actually was the literary genius who turned the agreement of the bishops to the English Bible into the King James Bible and that wonderful language. We don't know who it was. Well, we don't know who had the bright idea around 1200 of turning single-volume Bibles from something like the Codex Amiatinus that it takes 4 people to lift, which is more building than book, which is an authoritative statement about what books you have on the shelf of the library of scripture, the Bible, and what editions of those texts, into something that every friar who graduated in theology would have a copy to put in their scrip and carry out with them for preaching on the road. And that gave you the sort of Gideon Bible that we get in hotel rooms. Now, that is a massive publishing enterprise. And any self-respecting stationer could churn out about 500 of those per year by subcontracting all of the scribal work, the pen flourishing. There would be people who spend all day, every day, doing the pen flourishing. Red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, blue, red, blue, red, blue, red. Green, purple, I must be in the Netherlands, because there's a lot of stylistic variation. And people would spend all day laying on disembodied pieces of gold leaf or shell gold ink, because although it's the most expensive, you do that first, because if you're going to burnish it, and trim it to size, you damage the other pigments or script around it. Okay? So you've got this, and then it all has to be brought together by the stationer and then the binder employed to actually bind the book. And it's also the stationer's job to actually interview patrons and see how deep their purses are and try and up the ante and get them to spend more. Okay? And there are a range of choices that are available, and there are also possibilities for your own desires to be expressed up to a point, depending on what the work is, and that's what we're going to be looking at next. Caxton, when they start printing, you talk about editions of 100, 200 max. So this whole idea that printing suddenly brings, mass production of books, it takes a while for that to actually occur. What does happen is the colour goes out of the world for a while, and printed books have to be hand-coloured to compensate. So portable study Bibles, this is Judith about to top holophonies. So again, you could have them as simple or as expensive as your pocket wished. And stationers would also commission things to sell off the peg as well. The other thing that took most of Paris's time in the 13th century was producing the Bible Moralise. There are 4 copies of this that survive, all for French royalty or their Spanish relatives, and each one of these books has 13,000 images. Does the style and the layout remind you of anything in another media? Stained glass, like the Sainte-Chapelle, okay? And basically, these are work on typology, an Old Testament scene that has a New Testament parallel, and then the captions that give you a moralistic interpretation. And basically, it's sort of a tool for kings on good government based upon biblical law and New Testament interpretation of the law. So Paris is busy. And around the university and the royal court and Notre Dame de Paris and the various abbeys, this incredible production grows. And lay readers want to get in on the act. So you find a growth in illustrated bestiaries, apocalypses, because apocalypse now isn't new. People like to be terrified to death. Histories, romances, all increase being made and start being made more in the vernacular. Although we'd started all of that when Bede produced the first vernacular translation of any part of the Bible on his deathbed in 735. There we go. And then books of hours from the 1230s. Now, books of hours are the thing you would most be likely to have if you were doing well in life. And your literacy isn't just based on your class. If you're the Duke of such and such, who spent 35 years fighting in the field and the rest of the time hunting, shooting and fishing, you're not going to be much given to education because you've got chaplains and secretaries for that sort of stuff. If you're the daughter of a York merchant, you're going to be as literate and numerate and polyglot as you need to be to turn a buck for the family business. Yeah? So all sorts of different drivers. So Matthew is very much interested in chronicling what's going on in the turbulent 13th century. Again, he is a prolific map maker and does lots of itineraries as well on the late Roman model, Ptolemy and others. And you can see some of his itineraries here. You can see the 2 Roman walls, Hadrian and Antonine walls, marked quite clearly at the top there, for example, and his self-portrait dedicating the work. He also is interested in innovatio and traditio and what you could do to stretch the parameters of received wisdom. His normal drawings of elephants, like those in the bestiary, show elephants without kneecaps, because there's a passage in Pliny the Elder that says, don't fight in a castle on top of an elephant, because when they go down, they can't get up because they haven't got kneecaps. And that's what George Lucas picked up on in the first of the Star Wars movies, when you've got those incredible spider elephants that come crashing to the ground. But then came the fateful day when Matthew was invited to the Tower of London to see Henry III's new pet, which was an elephant that had been given to him. And the scholastic experimental observer in him had to admit the elephant has kneecaps. He also goes beyond the remit and shows the keeper and includes in the notes that the keeper was so sorry for the elephant being so out of its environment that he would sleep with it every night and make sure as far as he could that all of its creature comforts were taken care of, but it still didn't live very long. And I love this. You wouldn't get this from the text. This little detail in the Chronica Major is a scandal of the day, which is how did Prince Griffin of Wales actually fall out of that upper story window in the Tower of London? It was the big did he jump, was he pushed debate. And here, with a little line drawing, Matthew has given his version, which put the case to bed, which was it was the old let's tie the bed sheets together and make a rope and the knot slipped. Death by misadventure, nobody's fault. So the power of the marginal space really becomes important. He also wrote hagiographies, the life of Amphibolus, life of St. Alban, the life of the two offers, and illustrated royal genealogies, and all of these totally with his own hand. So a very important chronicler. 14th century, I've got two. I've got a diptych for you. I've got the Lord of the Manor's view of the world, and I've got the jobbing Cockney artist in London, and what the books, two books they've left us, give of their mindset on the same period, which is roughly the 1330s. Okay? So we're going to start with John Fifhide's Poor Man's Bible picture book, the Holcomb picture book. This is the first of the thing called a Poor Man's Bible, which takes its name from the woodblock printed versions of the idea of basically telling the Bible story in captioned pictures. They were often for very, very wealthy people, the fully illuminated ones. But it starts here. And here is St. Paul's churchyard, next to St. Paul's Cathedral in London in the 1320s to early 30s. And if you could see that even bigger, you would see this guy is the most wonderful, wonderful draftsman, other than the fact he's never seen a camel, and he obviously hadn't been to the Royal Zoo, or the elephant was no longer alive. But if you look at the things he does know, like the British birds, it's beautiful work. But it's unusual again. It's in tinted drawing, but it's even crazier than that, in that you've got all of these sort of diapered, almost stitched backgrounds, and you've got odd colour combos to show the highlights on your drapery. So hold those thoughts a moment. We're talking about London. We're talking about the bridge, London Bridge in the background, and St. Paul's Cathedral just beyond it, and the Bridge House Trust, which was the ceremonial entry point into London, rented out most of the properties to those involved in book production and to many other of the early proto-guilds at this period. This is from a 1480s book made in the Netherlands that shows the White Tower of the Tower of London. It was commissioned or purchased by Edward IV in the Netherlands. But opposite it, we've got our Londoner. I'm sorry this is very faded, but this is because this has served as the outer cover of the book at some point. Now that immediately tells us something about its status. Okay? And you've got a Dominican in his black and white robes. He's holding a newfangled device, prayer beads. And that, of course, is where Pater Noster Row got its name from, because they started making prayer beads. And immediately next door to them was our chap who made this book. It's where you would go to buy your underwear, your lingerie, your papal vestments, your books. If you didn't buy them in that area, you would probably go to the court on Thorney Island at Westminster and get them from somebody like Matthew Paris, who seems to have produced books at the court as well as in St. Albans Abbey. Okay. So, what have we got? We've got a Dominican holding these newfangled prayer beads. Above, on this beautiful arcade with the lily extensions of the major architecture of the day, we've got a grotesque with a human head on the right, and then we've got a monkey looking narcissistically at its own reflection in a mirror. So there's a bit of punning on human folly. The ape the similes, because he apes the follies of mankind, is a popular way of satirising. If you did want to show Boris Johnson being a, whatever you want to call Boris Johnson, you would show a monkey doing it, okay? Okay, and then we've got in the pale blue, turning round, why are you interrupting my work? You'll see a close-up of him in a minute. A beautiful young man, he's young, he's blonde, he's got an expensive robe, he's got his lay cap on, and he is drawing 2 full-page miniatures of a king and a queen. Okay? But he's interrupted. And the speech scrolls that they are holding, the Dominican says, make a good job of this because it's going to be shown to very important people. And the artist said, could be the best thing that you've seen, if I'm spared. This is a fiction. No way is this book commissioned by a Dominican from Blackfriars. Our artist undoubtedly went to listen to the best preaching in Britain in St. Paul's from the Dominicans, if that's the sort of preaching that you liked. You know, it's a high level, extremely theologically detailed. And he's used the idea of being commissioned to do this book. But the things that he does in this book, no self-respecting learned Dominican would ever countenance for a moment. This is a front for our artist doing what the heck he wants. Okay? Right. And that's what stands there now at St. Paul's Wharf. Thank you, Sir Christopher. And that's what stood there then. The highest building north of the Alps until the spire was hit by lightning in the Tudor period. And with we didn't have a university in London. We had theological, legal and music schools clustered around St. Paul's Cathedral. So it's like a proto-university in some respects. And roughly where Elizabeth Frink's statue of the Good Shepherd stands and Wren's chapter house, I used to sit in boring chapter meetings there thinking about what John Hyde would have been doing in the window outside sometimes. I shouldn't say that, should I? Why not? Anyway, there we go. And here he is. You can see him a little bit clearer with his... he's astute, his pen is poised, and yes, this is him setting his credentials, bless you. And this is the period, of course, when you've got the friars are producing great artwork in Italy with narrative cycles, the film storyboard, to actually help get the message out there. This is Duccio's Maestà. Okay, and I think John Hyde had travelled widely, including in Italy. And he was making vestments and altarpieces for the papacy, as well as for St. Paul's and for other patrons who wanted to commission things to give to major churches of the day. This cope is, well, it's massive. It's about 15 feet in diameter. And you can see there's quite a lot of imagery there, and it's scenes from the life of Christ. And if you were to look closely, you can see that the architectural surrounds are identical to what we've got in the Holcomb Bible. And this way of actually having the planes of the drapery and the contrasting blue and white, green and yellow, all of this, and the way in which the embroidered ground of having a diaper work of sewn embroidered leaves in gold thread is very much what he does in the background. My contention is that he's a textile manufacturer at the top of his game. Okay? And that's what he can do in 2 centimetres by 3 with his needle. And it is very, very close to the manuscript. There's some lovely pieces that they haven't accredited, even though I pointed them out in the V&A, including a couple that are actually on display in the medieval gallery downstairs. So watch out for his work. He goes off-piste. I think, looking at the codicology of the way in which the book is put together, he started off making a pamphlet which was going to run through scenes from the life of Christ of the sort that he's doing on that great papal cope. Okay? But then he has a rethink. You've got incredible images, such as this crucifixion, and look at the way in which the ground is handled again. That's how you sow the ground in Opus Anglicanum at this time. And you start with, with the life of Christ. But he doesn't complete the scenes from the life of Christ. You can see the blank in that. And he takes it apart and he reframes it as a bigger book. and decides, I'm going to tell the whole story from creation to the apocalypse, incorporating the life of Christ in it. And he shows himself as one of the major dramatis personae in that story and as one of the prime recipients of the act of salvation. Now that is unusual in medieval art. He starts with the Wheel of Fortune, because this is a period when kings are going round that wheel and nobles with aspiration like nobody's business. And he's working in the period when Edward II has just been seen off with a red-hot poker inserted where red-hot pokers were never meant to go, allegedly by his Queen Isabel and her lover Mortimer, and factions led by Thomas of Lancaster, of course, who was defeated at the Battle of Boroughbridge in 1322 and then executed in front of his nephew, Edward II, in Pontefract Castle. There's a lot going on, and people are taking sides, and they're worried about meltdown in the face of bad government. Okay? So, what does he do? Basically, everything's set within the world he knows. When Adam and Eve are turfed out of the Garden of Eden, it's St. Paul's churchyard that they're thrown out of. Okay? And we've got other depictions that anchor this. If you look at the image there of the descendants of Adam and Eve having to work for a living, you can see that diaper work and the embroidered form of the ground line, etc., very clearly. Then he likes his Apocrypha, and he loves his things like Pseudo Matthias and the Gospel of Thomas. And these are the things that you wouldn't get a Dominican pulling in. So basically, did you know that when the missing years between Christ being left behind at the temple, disputing with the doctors, and suddenly popping up at the marriage of Cana, what happened? Well, did you know that he was apprenticed to a London textile manufacturer? Well, here we do. And basically, the boss is going out for a long lunch, and he's got 3 big commissions. He's got to have 3 batches dyed differently. And so poor old Jesus is not going to get to any lunch or to go and play with his friends that afternoon. So he waits for the boss to go, does a sleight of hand, puts everything in the one vat, and they come out 3 separate colours. A textile worker or somebody behind this. And then the one opposite, the image opposite, you see that there are numbered scenes there. Now, this, I think, relates to numbered parts in the Clerkenwell mystery plays that are being performed this time. And I think, a bit of further evidence as we go along, he's actually taking part in those plays as part of the textile workers' contribution. Okay? And so you've got Mary having to fess up to Joseph that she's expecting a little miracle, and the neighbours basically in the caption saying, you needn't think we don't know what she's been up to, the tart. And it's interesting, the captions are all made up to accompany the images, and they're in like a franglais. There's the Latin you use for law and the church, there's the High Court French for polite society, and there's the Middle English you shout out of the window at the kids. All together, and quite an old-fashioned hand for that time. It's like he's got his dad, who might have been a notary or somebody to write his captions for him. He also gives us the best information about Jewish dress and liturgical customs, and this is 40 years or so after the Jews had been expelled to allow the government to renege on the national debt, following the French example. But he is intimately acquainted with this as a young man. Come back to why a little bit later. So you can see this image of the circumcision, and on the other page at the bottom you can see the wearing of the tefillin, the phylacteries, so God is always on your mind, which was the badge of Judaism that Jews had to wear in England, rather like the yellow star in France. And this is up to the minute, his knowledge of what's going on. He also, I think, leaves us colophons, pictorial colophons. He's always there when his name saint is there, John the Baptist. And he's normally hiding in a group of 5 doctors of the law, like canons of St. Paul's Cathedral. And so here you can see John is baptising, and who are the onlookers? A little group of 5 doctors of the law, and in the middle of them, with his lay cap and his lovely golden curls, is our artist from his self-portrait at the beginning. And his eyebrows respond to all the scenes: joy, shock, horror, etc. Okay? John who hides in 5. John Fifth Hyde. And I found in the London records of the time of the Bridge House that there was a John Fifth Hyde, textile manufacturer to the Pope, who was renting premises in Paternoster Row. Okay. What else have we got? Oh, this is nice. Here you've got the Virgin washing the Christ Child's loincloth because she knows it's going to come in, swaddling clothes, because it's going to come in handy as the loincloth that's found in the empty tomb later. So she's always prepared. And there she is in what is probably John Fifth Hyde's house. It's a solar property above the shop with a nice premises above in Paternoster Square. And here you've got an irate father coming to have a go at the Virgin Mary. You can see an enlargement of it on the right, because she's not paid attention to the kids, and the Christ Child has got them all excited again, and his kid has fallen out the window and broken his neck, and would she please mind getting the Christ Child to stick him back together again? Okay? And then opposite that, you've got Christ and his mates surfing on a rainbow, and they're all falling off and doing themselves an injury because only the Christ dude can surf on a rainbow. Learned Dominican? No. The Temptation of Christ is on the spire of St. Paul's Cathedral, is depicted on the cathedral's seal, and the London Towerscape is a quote from one of Matthew Paris's topographical maps. Note there's a windmill on the high place there. The St. Paul's Dean and Chapter are one of the first to have a windmill on their property at Hampstead Heath, which is where they would go when things got a bit steamy and pest-ridden in the city. And this is another manuscript that has pictorial colophons. It's a book of canon law that was made in about 1320 in Bologna. It was addressed to the University of Paris, but within 10 years it had washed up in London, where it was given a full series of bas de page marginal illustrations. This shows a mason and his apprentice stopping to have lunch whilst working on the cathedral masonry, and several of the scenes show a John in battle, and it was modernised for John de Bataille, who was a canon of nearby Smithfield Priory. Okay? So there's a precedent for it. This is our artist being absolutely horrified as Salome does her lap dance for King Herod. He's holding his pen, he's looking up at the text and saying this is going to end badly, and then looking over Herodias's shoulder in horror as John's head is brought to the table. His beloved John the Baptist. And this depiction of the ark is just phenomenal. You'll see the upper part of the ark was a rush job. It had to be done in wicker work because Noah didn't listen to God in time. And then if we look like Torcello or of the drowned horses and figures there, absolutely phenomenal. This is one of the most surprising passages in medieval art. Here we have a drowned, handsome young man with his tackle floating in the waves, and there a beautiful woman with long blonde hair with his toe tweaking her nipple, and the most graphic vulva that you will see depicted in medieval art. I'd like to hazard a guess that this is John and his beautiful young wife. I don't think this was ever meant to be seen beyond the family. It's a meditation on their personal salvation. It's not something that was shown to patrons in the way it was originally intended for that little pamphlet of scenes from the life of Christ. That is just quite remarkable. And here they've come to John to ask him to make the nails for the crucifixion. He's put another outfit, an apron, on top of his usual costume, dressing up for the mystery plays, and he's hit his thumb with a hammer and said, "No can do, mate. Throbbing. You have to get the wife to do it." So the wife gets the blame for making one of the instruments of the Passion. And in fact, there were so many men away on war work that even the furnaces in the Tower of London were smithed by women. at this time. The scene in which the tomb is found empty and the guards swear that nobody came and took the body away, you'll note that on the green shield there is the assay mark of the goldsmiths of London. This is true. And then the end times, the whales being thrown up on the beaches, the burning seas, we're seeing a fair bit of that on our news screens. And interestingly again, the whitened sepulchre is a Jew holding his nose at the stench from a crusader's tomb. What's going on? Well, my John Fifthide carries on to high things. He becomes the Sheriff of London. And the reason he gets that honour is that he is put in charge of regulating banking negotiations with Jews on the continent. Do you see the world that opens up? Oh, I might be completely wrong. It might not mean any of that, but there you go. The nobles fighting amongst themselves, and then at the very last, we've got this wonderful scene. Oh, I haven't got it, but anyway, at the very end, there's a scene that actually shows it's a rush job at the end, and you've got the end times, and it's a pub with a big fireplace and a big bowl of stew on it, and little demons are coming and turfing the bishops and the barmaids, the alewives, into it, and the blessed are being shepherded elsewhere. And the caption is, "And you think you've got it hard. Up there, you don't even get Sundays off." An urban artist's view. And then what would you like me to do? Would you like the fascinating Lord of the Manors to juxtapose with that? Or do you want Henry VIII? Please say the Lord of the Manor. Please say the Lord of the Manor. I'll do an abbreviated Lord of the Manor. Okay, because I think it is important to get the two together. Okay, so we've got the Luttrell Salter, Sir Geoffrey Luttrell, Lord of the Manor of Irnham in Lincolnshire. His people came over as mercenaries with the Conqueror. I'm going the wrong way, aren't I? Came over with William the Conqueror's mercenaries, and they must have had something about them because they married a whole series of heiresses and basically owned most of the estates running up the North Road. And this was commissioned of a Norwich stationer in the first instance in the 1330s by Sir Geoffrey Luttrell and his family. And the project was never really completed. Something went wrong with it. And basically, let's see what it says about it. So we've got the knight there, and we've got a colophon. So no modesty here. Dominus Galfridus Luttrell may fieri fecit. Lord Geoffrey Luttrell had me made. And there he is on his old war horse. He spent 28 years on it in the field fighting the Scots and the French for his beloved Edward I, who is now defunct, and he's not at all impressed with where the young royals are taking things. Okay, and this isn't really him as a knight. At this period, he's in his early 50s. This is the 1330s, and he's been asked to go up to be one of the barons in Westminster for proto-parliament, and he basically says, "I can't get on my horse anymore. It's a dangerous place to be." He wants to go under the radar a bit. He's always in and out of the courts because he is quite litigious and everything. And he's also one of the pioneers of the Lancastrian cause, trying to effect regime change. So he doesn't want to be at Westminster. Okay. And this is rather like the Black Knight's tomb in Canterbury. You've got his wife, Agnes Sutton, who's handing up his crested helm. You've got his daughter-in-law, Beatrice le Scrope, handing up his shield. You've got the Luttrell silver martlets on the horse's trappings. And he actually leaves the horse to the parish priest in his will, which is like leaving him your Tesla. And the church, of course, has to pay for war gear, so it would have been quite a convenient thing to have. And his will tells us an awful lot. Now, the two women in his life would have had a vested interest in Luttrell plc. Agnes and he had been married for nearly 30 years, but the tension is rising because they're first cousins and they've married within the bounds of consanguinity to keep the property in the family. But the son and heir, Andrew, is about to come of age, and the way in which things are going with the royals, they could well declare him a bastard and confiscate all of the lateral property. There's a lot of tension, and then there's a lot of joy when the letter comes from the Pope saying you can remain married. Okay? So we're talking about 1334 or thereabouts. He's determined to have Beatrice Le Scrope in the family. She's the daughter of the biggest legal eagle of the day, Geoffrey Le Scrope, who's also a character in chivalry, and has a wonderful library full of grotesques from canon law books. And he affiances his son Andrew to her when they're 2 and 3, respectively. And then he follows up with affiancing one of his daughters to Le Scrope's son when they're babies. So he's not taking any chances on not having that union. She's never able to fulfill the promise of the text above that she illustrates the womb of the dawn. She never conceives. Towards the end of her life, she writes to the Pope saying, I've visited every shrine in Britain that I can reach. Can I have permission to travel on the continent to as many as I can with just my maid and a squire? Andrew's not interested in her any longer. When she dies, within a year, he marries an 18-year-old, and he's 56, and she conceives in just about 9 months. So there's a bit of a story going on there. When it was purchased for the nation, the plate was passed during the Pathang News, etc. It appeared in Country Life magazine as a symbol of conservative custodianship of the land and the nation, and it appeared in the Socialist Worker as a paean of praise to the horny-handed sons of toil. So something in there for everybody. And you can see the Piers ploughman archetype using exactly the sort of heavy mouldboard plough that was used at that time, but not the 4 bullocks. If you look at the visitations for this period, because there's already quite a lot of cattle moraine, etc., they were larger teams of mixed bovine and equine. Okay, this is the 4 evangelists ploughing the land for the reception of the word. So you've got this multivalence. It's got incredible grotesques. In fact, M.R. Janes, when he first wrote about it, said surely the artist was on some substance, and mushroom ergot poisoning was suggested. But again, they're quite erudite. Some of them make really nice family pets, but some of them are the stuff that nightmares are made of. The thieving magpie. This one could be a child's toy, but it also looks very much like siege engines depicted from the period. And here, the ultimate symbol of the world turned upside down on the margins, a wife beating her husband with her spindle whirl as a daughter of Eve. And look at his knife sticking out of his pocket. That's a popular Middle English euphemism. And you can see that he doesn't fancy his lady wife. It's pointing in totally the opposite direction. And if you've ever seen a skull's bridle that would break your jaw and your teeth, you know that this is no laughing matter. Okay. So what goes on the margins if good government and a well-ordered manorial estate is not to be had? Here we've got a doctor who is looking at a very early example of a urine specimen glass, possibly for pregnancy, who's got Athena's owl of wisdom on the front, but underneath is pure quack. And then what about this chap with the 3-legged pot on his head and the dramatic broken nose and body armour? Again, if you were to confess during Lent that you've been a particularly dirty bird, one penance you might get is you have to wear your potty on your head whenever you go out in public. And then what about this? Young women with their fashionable books of hours in velvet bindings, velvet dust jackets, but underneath they're just vain birds. What's the point in educating them? And Sir Geoffrey had a number of vain birds in his household, as we'll see. And the horrors of war. This is worthy of Terry Gilliam and Monty Python, with the scarred face of the peasant who forms the hat of this grimacing monster. And at the bottom, people already, neighbours, suing one another as law and order begins to break down. This is the manor at Irnham. Normally, a member of the family would be the parish priest, but in these turbulent times, the Bishop of Lincoln has said, no, I want my man in there. So Geoffrey immediately employs 5 chaplains on payroll to live and eat with him in his manor. No way is he going to confess to the bishop's man and have it back, getting back to the king. There's a Tudor manor house behind now, but if you go to Houghton Paynell near Hampole in Nottinghamshire, you'll find a beautiful gatehouse that was built by Sir Geoffrey and his wife Agnes. And they turned the side chapel into virtually a chantry chapel. They commissioned a beautiful Easter sepulchre from the sculptors at Lincoln and turned that into their own chantry. And I think it's there that in his will, Sir Geoffrey says that his bier is to be put out there at the funeral. There are to be £100 worth of candles burnt. The annual valuation of Luttrell PLC for the main estate is £20. £100 of candles burnt and £200 given to the poor, along with a good meal. And 5 clerics to sing psalms from the Psalter. And Luttrell Psalter does have music for the Office of the Dead every year on the anniversary. And all the poor are to be given £100 and a good meal every year. This is serious philanthropy. Somebody who's really worried about the hereafter. And here we've got in the book the 5 clerics singing from the same song sheet. Here we've got, it says it's Constantinople, but it's actually Norwich, where he did most of his business. And we know that because if you look at the pub signs, the windmill, the golden bells, etc., they're still in that position. And that's how the cathedral appears on the cathedral seal. And it's the May Day, the young men are coming out, strutting their stuff, and on the ramparts you've got young women with what Richard Roll, who was a personal friend of Sir Geoffrey and lived nearby, brimstone preacher of the day, calls the devil's sail, women's fripperies that will carry us all off to the devil. And the Norwich artists, they start responding to unusual things in the commission. They're pretty straight, there are 3 of them. They do all of the script, all of the architectural decoration, and the first third of the marginal illustrations. So you've got the Annunciation to the Virgin, humble, book, veiled head, angel. But what about that red head? Uncovered hair, Ars Akimbo. No way she's going to do humbly anything that anybody tells her, even God. So already unusual things creeping in. The murder of Becket, one of Sir Geoffrey's main saints whose shrine he patronised. And you can see all these grotesques saying to one another, quick, come and join in. There's dirty business afoot. Martin of Tours splitting his cloak with the beggar, and somebody being encouraged by the acorn from which mighty oaks do grow to literally step up to the mark. And the show-through from the back page is somebody about to be decapitated by a swordsman. And somebody has written underneath the sword blade, very faintly, Lancaster, in a contemporary hand. And on the neck are 3 bloody gashes. And when they tried to execute Thomas of Lancaster in Pontefract, the swordsman had to have 3 abortive attempts. So this is a coded, we want Thomas to be sanctified. These are the shivering souls in Italian fashion, and the banner there is that of Agnes, so I think that marks her death in 1340, because the project took several years to finish. This is a Dominican pun of the day, Dominicanus, the hounds of the Lord, chasing out sins, with Reynard the fox hiding in the undergrowth. And here we've got the Luttrells at table for the January feast, and we've got a lot of hypertext and intertextuality going on here, keywords and things that you need to equate with books on the shelf of your inner library of memory to really be able to decode. And basically you've got Sir Geoffrey in his cosy cap. He's always shown in this when he's not on his war horse. It's like his cardigan. And his eyes swivel up, so you're seeing the whites of it, and he's holding a chalice. His son and heir, Andrew, next door, is doing likewise with a wafer. At the end of the table is his young bride, Beatrice Le Scrope, with the fashionable long ermine sleeves dipping in the gravy that are only fashionable from 1334 to 1340. And then you've got Agnes nagging away, carving a chicken, etc. And then you've got the butler John of Calne, who received all of the silver and pewter work in Geoffrey's will and the tapestry that you see there. And then you've got two Dominicans. The young one's eyes are swivelling to Jamie Oliver on the facing page, who's roasting pigs and stuff and thinking, I'm a vegetarian. And then next to him, an older Dominican who's looking straight at you. And I think that is Brother William of Fotheringay, who was the most senior of Sir Geoffrey's household clerks, his personal chaplain and confessor. And I think it's he who devises the brief for these off-piste elements and who gets up close to the family, who rehearses all of their successes, all of their failures and all of their scandals, because his job is to get them to participate in the heavenly feast. The figure at the front with a withered hand and the Jewish prayer stole, by analogy with a depiction of the Last Supper a few pages away and local stained glass, is probably Judas. Okay? And then the counterpoint. They have eyes that do not see, says the text, ears that do not hear, hands that are withered, for they do not the Lord's work, and feet that do not walk the paths of righteousness. He can draw feet, but they ain't got them. Do better, laterals. Up close and personal, like you just wouldn't believe. Family scandal. Young woman, very wealthy, closed locked jewel box, doing her hair, comb and mirror, looking very much like the mermaid a few pages away, which is the symbol of prostitution that you would hang outside of brothels. And I think this refers to an episode in which, when she was 12, Sir Geoffrey's daughter Elizabeth is sent to the household of the Duke of Gloucester to try and conclude a marriage with his son. While she's there, she falls for an ambitious young cleric on the make, Thomas of Ellica. And you'll note in the margin a young man who's got a clerical tonsure which has grown out with a George Michael stubble. He's not exactly following his vocation, and he's trapping a bird with a net. He elopes with her. Sundry bishops and barons set off in pursuit in true Mr. Darcy fashion. How much, doting parents, would you pay for your daughter to be returned to the bosom of her family and declared virgo intacta? £100 is your annual revenue for a value of your major business. You've got others, though. Come on, give me an offer. £1,000. It was more than they paid to get Richard Coeur de Lion out of prison. There was a lot resting on this politically. She goes on, she marries, her husband dies in a couple of years, and she becomes the ultimate merry widow. I think we may have her a few pages away, same pink robe, still reflecting the mermaid's tail, and she's got a widow's hood, and she's got a little squirrel with a gold bell. And that pose of holding your legs akimbo isn't something ladylike, frankly. And the squirrel is the beaver of the day. It's a symbol of female sexuality. So there we have her, naughty Elizabeth, now the ultimate merry widow, totally in charge of her own libido and happily playing with it. Okay, I'm sorry, I've got to stop, haven't I? I don't want to stop. Can I finish lateral?
Finish lateral and then we'll do questions.
Okay. This, I think, is a pun on Isabella Mortimer. You've got what would be a nubile young man playing a queen at that point amongst the most despised troubadours, the players of the day. And note the young queen whose eyes swivel to meet the eyes of an equally anxious-looking young man. I think this is a play on Isabella and her supporter, Mortimer, which is in direct contrast to the figure that supports the symbol of idealised queenship, the Eleanor Cross, of which Sir Geoffrey had 3 on his estates. And this is a quick PhD in how to read across imagery. You start on the right with Sir Geoffrey in his cosy cap being rowed backwards by his howling sins, but truth and mercy kicking on the words next to them in the text, haul him in the right direction towards the snail, who leaves a silver track along the page, picking up on the word Illumino above. And if you have your bestiary on the shelves of your inner library, you know that the snail symbolises mortality, but also humility, because it draws in its antenna when faced with righteous authority. What better symbol of righteous authority than the bull, symbol of St. Luke, which signifies Christ crucified, and which is also the nickname of his beloved Edward I, Taurus, and his beloved queen, who is elevated, and Geoffrey's hopes of sharing in that divine apotheosis through his service of God and King. Or it might not. Okay, right, I will finish Geoffrey there. Oh, so we did do wonderful reconstructions of the farming scenes. There is a film of them online if you want to Google it, and they are remarkably well observed, but they all have a meaning associated with them. For example, here you've got the young man, wealthy, coming with his sack to the mystic mill, which is Christ, who turns the grain of the Old Testament into the flour of the New Testament, and the elderly widow who's bought a bulging stack, and the snarling Dominicanus who's snarling at the lazy young man and has welcomed the widow. Lots of these social justice things going on. There's so much. Let's have a lateral lecture sometime. Lots more we can say about that, but we'll just end with the last third doesn't get its marginalia except for one page, and it's all love's young dream, it's rootstocks being joined together and roses, etc. And this is the only bit that Andrew paid to have finished off to celebrate his second marriage to his 18-year-old virgin, and a brass in the parish church. And in his will, he says, I don't want anybody coming to my funeral. If they do, give them a glass of water and send them away. And I will pray one priest to say prayers for me and my overlord in the De Boon family for 1 week and 1 week only. But his grandson died at the siege of Calais, and if it wasn't for Daddy's big pyramid book, we wouldn't be talking about the laterals perhaps today. I'm sorry, War of the Roses and Tudorites. There is more, but perhaps another lecture one day somewhere.
This was absolutely captivating. You've sort of transported us to several other worlds. We have time for a few questions, and there are helpers who will bring a microphone so the questions can be heard.
And if you don't ask me, I ask you, and that gets nasty.
Are you bringing microphones for the questioners? No? Right here. Raise your hand high.
Thank you for a marvelous talk. I wanted to ask you about John Fifthide and the fact that the drapery in the images is so distinctive and interesting, and if you think that that might contribute to your theory that it's the textile maker.
Yeah, absolutely. He's found a way of, he's sussed how to do it in embroidery, Opus Anglicanum, and he's transporting a new way of doing it into manuscript imagery, and then it catches on in other manuscripts in different ways. But yeah, absolutely, there's so much textile reference in there. Well spotted.
Again, thank you very much. It's really interesting. Again, about John Fifthide. You said the Bible that he illustrated was very much for private use. What would have happened if the church had found out about that Bible? I'm just...
Put it this way. When Tyndale's Bible is smuggled back into the country and the Bishop of London makes it his business to collect up and burn all of the copies in St. Paul's churchyard, and then 10 years later it's the first place to have one chained to a column in the crypt for public consultation, a neighbouring tailor comes in and reads it every day in his lunch breaks, etc., and sets himself up on what had been the Thingamoot site, like Speaker's Corner, where the books had been burned, and starts preaching, and soon finds himself burnt for so doing. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and John Fifthide has hung around with all of them and listened to everything they've said, and he thinks he knows an awful lot. but it's not knowledge that he is necessarily supposed to be. And he's not doing it in English, he's doing it in captions. He's very cleverly, not that he could, I don't think intellectually, have done a Wycliffe or a Tyndale, and he's ahead of that. But he is paraphrasing, and he's doing it in a mishmash, so nobody can kind of accuse him of actually... But yeah, I think he would have been in trouble because there was
So
a lot
you
of stuff that's very uncanonical.
You think he was playing a very dangerous game?
Yeah.
Can you pass the mic forward?
I don't think you need one, but
Yeah.
let's get the mic round for those that can't hear at the back.
Thank you very much for the talk. Very, very good indeed. Where is Irnham? You say near Lincoln, the church? Irnham?
Irnham, yeah, it's near Bourne.
Oh, Bourne, right.
Yeah, and another thing that Geoffrey was trying to do, he wanted Stanford to be the second university rather than Cambridge. So lots of patronage of the different ecclesiastical foundations and trying to create colleges out there
Thank
in
you.
Stanford.
Yeah, thank you.
Do we have another question?
These books are exceptional in the amount that they tell us about their owners. Every unique book will tell you something about its owners and makers, but don't go away thinking that they're all going to yield such rich pickings
This was
or unconventional
Yeah,
pickings.
this was remarkable. Thank you, Michelle, for an amazing, captivating, spellbinding, fascinating talk and for answering the questions. I'm sure many people will want to buy the book Illumino or some of Michelle's other books, and they are at the back where you can buy and have a book signed. Thank you all for attending. Please be sure to look at the festival program to see what else is coming up, many more wonderful events to come. And can we thank Michelle again for coming and giving such a wonderful lecture.